All right. Okay, everyone. Thank you very much for attending. So I know we've got a bunch of new people. I want to kind of get going on the agenda. So first of all, I'm in our new Milwaukee or Portland location. It's funny. I was in Alaska a couple of days ago, and someone said, "My God, we did a deal in Milwaukee," and I was like, they were totally freaked out about the fact that we were in Wisconsin. And so I said, no, it's Milwaukee, Oregon. It's basically Portland, Oregon. So in any event, so what I'd like to do, I think I explained to everyone here, but I would like to go around all the first timers and just a quick introduction, and we'll start with here people who are on this call for the first time. Pete, if you can just start. And just quick who you are.
Peter Ng, pharmacist.
Randy Zering, pharmacist.
You guys are going to have to speak louder, though, I think.
Rick Mitchell, Northwest Regional Controller.
Ben, I am a pharmacy technician.
Okay.
Chris Villanueva from Seattle.
Okay. Holy crap. Do we have anyone else working in the pharmacy? You got your main guy out there. No, you got your main guy out there. You got your main man. Sorry, we got a number of people here in Portland. Okay, is that it? All right, who else do we have on the phone that's on for the first time?
Tony King in Montana.
All right, hey Tony, how are you?
Good.
Okay, so let's just jump into it. We got a number of people here in Portland. I'm just so happy to see the group get bigger and bigger. We are recording the call again, so I'll go ahead and post it on Yammer afterwards. So anyone who can't be on, or if you guys feel like someone that needs to attend should be on, then or should see it, then you can direct them to that. So real quick, we'll start out kind of agenda-wise. We'll start out talking about the strategic plan. Last month's theme of last month's call. Do a quick review. Make sure everyone's clear on what they're doing. Then we'll do a Xenium. We'll let Xenium and Tana. I don't know if hopefully the Xenium team's on board. Oh, she just arrived. We'll ask them to do a quick on what they need, anything that they've got going on, and then we'll jump into the theme this month. And the theme this month is what I call kind of put a bow on it. And the reason, kind of the thinking behind that is this: as I think back over the last year, we've done a lot of things really, really well. And then there are a number of things that we haven't done well at all, and we've really tripped. And now we're kind of paying a price for it, and we're scrambling to try to keep, kind of get ourselves out of a jam. And for the most part, one of the things that as I've thought a lot about this, the issue that I sort of think about what's going on here. One of the big issues that I think I've identified, and I've talked to a number of senior people. Unfortunately, Matt Keith is traveling right now. I really wanted Matt to be on this call because Matt is, for those of you guys who work with him, he is kind of the master of getting things to the finish line. What I see as a problem here is that we've got a lot of things going on, but the really, really important things sometimes don't get to the finish line. And so what I mean by put a bow on it is getting something to the finish line, getting it ready, putting a bow on it, and handing it off to the next sort of, and moving on to the next issue. The reason I think is because oftentimes we are very busy with what I would consider less important things, and then that makes us take our eyes off the ball on the really important things. Now, the solution, I don't have all the solutions, by the way. I mean, one of the things that, these calls kind of turn into a lecture. I don't want anyone to think that I think I know what I'm doing totally. I kind of know what I'm doing, but there's a lot of these things, issues that we'll talk about today that I struggle with as much as everyone else. I myself have a problem with oftentimes getting distracted during the day, during the week. But there are particular methodologies, particular disciplines that really help us in doing it. So I'm going to talk about some of that, and really the purpose of this call oftentimes is to introduce you guys to concepts. So, stuff that I've read over time and, things that I come across that I think will help us as an organization move in the same direction. And it's really to introduce you to concepts, and really to a great extent, it's up to each individual person who wants to, go through a process of self-reflection and improvement to then take the ball and run with it from there. A lot of these things we try to work into the culture, into our underlying processes that we try to implement, but oftentimes at the end of the day it comes down to the people. So real quick, as far as the strategic planning process, I've sent out to all the responsible parties their responsibility. This is a process that is going to be very difficult, but it's needed. I spent a lot of time over the last 3 days when I was in Alaska working with the logistics team, working with the DME team. I think that Matt Keith, I talked to him yesterday. He is working with, he has started to work with the various pharmacy teams. I think the big work, the real heavy lifting is going to have to be done in Portland and in Washington and Oregon. So Reed, Mike Inman, the folks here in Portland, the leadership here in Portland, there's going to be a lot of work to be done because that's going to be the bulk. As I look at 2016, the real work is going to be how do these two locations work well together and how do we create real efficiencies around and do things well. I sent out some dates to the responsible parties. The more I've looked at these dates, part of the problem with these dates is it's kind of like if anyone is like me, you know, you sort of procrastinate and you wait till things are close to the finish line. So I'm thinking that December 7th date, the problem is the December 7th date in of itself is okay, but I think I may need to move the other two, the objectives and value drivers and the strategic planks. And for those of you guys who weren't on the last call, you know, we've got a process that we've started on strategic planning for 2016 that we're in the middle of, or what we've just started. So I'm thinking that the November 23rd dates probably need to be moved up more. So is there any thoughts or comments about where we are, where different people are in the process, about the dates? Is there any questions about the responsible parties or anything like that? Anything I need to clarify before we go to the next issue? Is everyone comfortable with, all the responsible parties, are they comfortable with what they have to do and the date by which they have to get it done? Okay, I'll take that as a yes. All right, well, before I go there, Tana, let me hand it off to you guys. What do you guys have to cover?
All I wanted to mention today is I'm going to be sending out an email to the leadership team regarding the Emotional Intelligence Book Club. We'll be scheduling a call for once a month for an hour, and we'll purchase the books for everybody. There's an assessment involved too, and it's really how to drive leadership performance through enhancing or improving emotional intelligence. And again, emotional intelligence falls into 4 categories: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. So really hoping to give you leaders some tools to more effectively get the most out of your people and help drive leadership performance. So I'll be sending out an email this weekend. Let me know if you're interested. I really think anybody that's got direct reports can participate, and it could be very meaningful and relevant.
Okay.
Anything you want to add, Dan?
Well, have you had anyone that has said that they're going to participate, or?
I've heard a couple people have told me they're interested, but I think once I send out the email and they can just let me know, I'm sure we'll get a lot more folks.
Okay. The other thing I guess I want to ask about is I sent an email earlier this week to our internal HR team. So Becca, relative to the Open Sesame, where are we? So one of the things that I want to do is I want to make online courses available to the team, especially relative to leadership and customer service. So there's going to be a variety of opportunities to do that, to take those online courses and watch the videos. So where are we on that?
Lisa and I were on the call with them yesterday. We learned there was about 42,000 videos available.
In those 2 areas?
Not just in those.
Yeah.
Whole thing.
Right.
But we could get you 50 users, and they can like upload to the DME training portion.
Okay.
So we can specifically say, Karen, we want you to take or watch these videos, take these courses, and it would be in through the DME train. So
okay. So, all right, I'm not sure because we got to definitely talk louder, I think, because of this. So one of the things we're going to do, Open Sesame is essentially an online course exchange, for the lack of a better description. You can go in, you can look for any courses that you're interested in taking. We'll have to figure out the economics of how we're going to sort of pay for it and how we're going to control that. But other than that, what I'd like to do is we're going to get 50 users. So we'd like to open that up to our management, and then maybe what we'll do is we'll figure out a way for them to help us identify certain courses around leadership and especially around customer service that then the various managers can share with their team, and you can even put the courses up on a projector and watch them together and then discuss it. So I think that would be a big useful thing for us to do, because one of the things I know for a fact is there is very little sort of formal client service training that has taken place in any of our locations. And, you know, I had this conversation yesterday when I was in Alaska with our DME team in Alaska. You know, we train people on what we do and what the products are. We don't train people on how to handle issues, how to handle problems with clients, how to sort of, you know, deal with clients who have who don't like what they're hearing from us and things like that. So I think that's an area that Tana, as far as the strategic plans for HR, there's a couple of areas that I've identified that I really think we need to focus on next year, and that's clearly one of them. Any questions on that? So Tana's going to send out the notes about the book club, and then I guess we'll wait for the HR team internally to work through and then make recommendations pretty soon.
I think we just need to talk with you.
Okay, great. So yeah, so we'll make a decision in the next week or so. All right, great. So let me jump into this because I want to make sure we finish right on time. So we got 45 minutes left, so that'll be good. So just for the people in this room, because there's so many new people in this room, so we do this call on a monthly basis. I focus on a particular area around leadership, around the cultural engagement, really having to do with the set of, you know, the cultural values that we really want to push into the company and really, you know, define what we stand for as a company. So I'd like it to be as interactive as possible. It's historically not that interactive because I think people are just really spread out. One of the things that I really wanted to do on this call, like I said, is Matt Keith was going to be a component of today's presentation. I'm actually going to push part of what he was going to do to next month's call, since Matt is on a plane today and he could not join us. So I'll just jump into it, and then we can go from there. All right. So first of all, I guess I'd like it to be people under 40 years old, or 50, let's call it 50 years old. Does anyone know who this guy is? I will open up to people over 50. I mean, this no one knows who this guy is?
No clue.
Huh? Okay. So okay, who was that? Who's on the phone?
That was Jim.
Okay, Jim. There you go. Okay, so this is Stephen Covey. So for those of you guys who don't know, Stephen Covey was a leadership guru. He wrote a book called 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So truly one of the best-selling books of all time. I don't even know how many. I mean, I'm guessing probably 30, 40 million copies of it has been sold in probably 100 countries. And I've read the book, and it used to be that, you know, sort of it was Management 101 many years ago, where everyone had to read Stephen Covey's book, and there's seminars and there's a whole methodology that he created around effective leadership. And there are things in the book, you know, it's sort of, he comes at it from somewhat of it. There's some very spiritual and religious aspects to it, which is fine, but really at the core of it, it's a lot of things about management and really to a great extent, it's personal effectiveness. And how do you get things done? And that's why the book is called 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So one of the things that I really wanted to focus on today's call is some of the key lessons from Stephen Covey, and you know, in terms of what can we glean from what he talked about, and how do we apply that to what our company, the struggles that I identified that our company is going through, which is sometimes some very important things just don't get to the finish line. Right, and getting things done. What does it take to do that, to actually get things to the finish line? So what he says here, effective leadership is putting first things first. So we'll talk a little bit about that, which is don't take your eyes off the most important things. Right. Ultimately, it's really easy to get distracted, but there are some core things that are just so critical to what we need to do, and the strategic planning process is a big part of that. The interesting thing is, so that's on sort of leadership, but effective management is having the discipline to actually carry it out. So if you think about it, sort of my job would be to just say, to define what, and I've always said this, my job is only to define what the most important things are, or the vision of what we need to do. The management team that we have has to make sure, they've got to make sure that they can actually execute it and get it to the finish line. And that's kind of the focus of what Covey did and what he studied. So, you know, one of the things, the analogies that I like to use, it's like, you know, if you're going to surf, the first thing you got to do is you got to get past the surf, right? So, you know, if for those of you guys who know anything about, or, you know, grew up near the beach, you can't surf unless you can actually get beyond the waves. And that's when you can start to paddle in and you can actually catch a surf. what you see in, when people that start out is they can't even get past the surf, right? They can't look past the surf. They're getting pounded so hard by wave after wave after wave that they can never even get up on the board. So I think this picture, the reason I like this picture is it's looking beyond that surf and looking at kind of what's coming down the line and then planning on how you're going to get past the surf so that you can actually catch the next wave. So this is what we're trying to do. The strategic planning process, defining what are the most important things, is really understanding what are the things that we absolutely have got to get done as a company. And you can kind of bring that down to each group, right? So each group in the company can have a focus on what it is that we're trying to get done. So really, what this whole Stephen Covey, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, it's pretty complicated. Although the book it's a short book, but it's one that you got to kind of read over and over again just to really internalize what he's saying. What I'm going to focus on is really the first 3 rules, the first 3 habits, which is be proactive, begin with the end in mind, and then putting first things first. The other 4 are really around creating collaboration. They're extremely important. They're around creating collaboration with teams that you work with. And then the last one, sharpening the saw. What he's talking about there is that process of self-improvement, that constant process of self-improvement through education, through practice, through a real focus on improving what it is that you need to do. So these are the rules. Being proactive, beginning with the end in mind, meaning understanding where it is that you want to go first, and then putting the first things first. What are the most important things? So I'm going to focus on those 3 and go through there. And I know it's hard to sort of interrupt as I'm talking, but I'll try to stop a couple of times to see if there's any questions or any comments. I'm not sure. So first of all, I guess, is there anyone on the phone who has read and how familiar or is very familiar with the 7 Habits? Jim, I guess you must be.
I've read it too, Tana.
Okay. Well, you don't
I have
but
also.
okay. All right.
Team
Sorry?
and
Okay. So habit 1, be proactive. So what's he talking about there? What he's talking about really, and he spends a lot of the concept, the ongoing concept in the book is you really are in charge of your life, right? Now, it's really easy, again, to get sucked in and think that, God, I'm getting pounded by these waves, right? But really, the core, all of the sort of the effectiveness starts out with that mental decision that I'm in charge, and I actually can impact what's around me. So that's core to all of that. So the way he describes it, we choose the scripts by which we live our lives. Use this self-awareness to be proactive and take responsibility. So unless we're willing to actually take responsibility for our actions and raise our hand and say, I screwed up, or you know what, I'll take this one on, then an organization can't really succeed, because there is no way an organization can move forward if only a few people at the top are the ones that are driving the bus, right? You've got to have everyone in that organization be willing to do that. The habit 2 is begin with the end in mind. So that's essentially, some of you guys have heard what, I kind of give the analogy of if you want to go to Hawaii and you decide, I'm going to take off from Portland, I'm going to go to Hawaii. Well, that destination is obviously critical to everything else that goes around it, right? So you got to know where it is you want to go. Then after that, it's how am I going to get there? I'm going to take a plane or I'm going to fly. What is the weather like? If you're a pilot, what's the weather like? How much fuel do I need? What are the coordinates? What are the air traffic control rules that I need to follow? And that becomes your strategic plan on how you're going to get there. Or on a more sort of something that probably more people can relate to, if you're going to go on a camping trip, if you're going to go from here to Mount Rushmore, you're going to have to, you're going to want to get to Mount Rushmore, but at the end of the day, you're going to need to know, if you're going to take an RV, where am I going to stop the RV? Where are the hookups? What kind of hookups do they have? Am I going to, how much fuel do I need? How much money do I need to get there? When I get there, what do I need? So that becomes a strategic planning process. But starting out with really understanding what it is that we want to go, where we want to go as a company is key to this. And then what I think is probably actually, of all these things, kind of from our perspective, the most important is putting first things first. So what he says, in order to manage ourselves effectively, we must put first things first. We must have the discipline to prioritize our daily actions based on what's most important, not what's most urgent. Now, in our business, that's kind of hard because there is urgency that jumps in every day. But what he talks about is oftentimes we can avoid what those things that are urgent if we had actually paid attention to the things that were important first. So if we had focused on what's important, then we can actually prevent what's urgent, right? So in your world, if you're proactive about what we're ordering, the drugs that we're ordering, and we're really on top of it, and we understand that we got to have, we've got our prime vendors, secondary vendors, and everything else, then most likely we're going to avoid most of the situations where all of a sudden we're out of drugs. And then now all hell's broken loose, and we're running around. We're trying to, get someone to drive over to the warehouse to pick some stuff up and things like that. So that's keeping our eyes on the ball on what's most important is a critical thing. So now, how do you do that? And this, to me, I can tell you, this was probably the most impactful. When I read The 7 Habits, this was probably the most impactful thing for me. And it's a very famous quadrant. I don't know how many people have seen this, but it's really interesting. So what he talks about is, he says, look, your actions, your sort of daily habits fall into, or daily, actions that you need to take, fall into 4 categories, what he calls quadrants. So 4 quadrants. Quadrant 1 is things that are important and urgent, right? So it's deadline driven, it's firefighting, and you often hear this term, which I use it too, but I hate it. It's like, we're just fighting fires, right? When you say I'm fighting fires, what that tells me is we're not actually taking care of the underlying business and where we need to go. Quadrant 1. Quadrant 2 is things that are not urgent but are important. So that means that these aren't things that need to be done today. They may not even be done next week, but they're important. Quadrant 3, not important and urgent. And quadrant 4, not urgent and not important. So that's sort of, if you begin to think about everything that you do in one of these 4 quadrants, I'm telling you from personal experience, it's really, really helpful. Because what the discipline that you sort of get into is when things are coming at you, you start to think about where, which of these does it fit in. So let me ask you a question. What do you guys think is the least important, and anyone can answer, what is the least important quadrant do you think in Stephen Covey's mind, and the one that probably should be avoided the most? Which quadrant?
4.
Okay. So ironically, it's 3. So what he talks about, because 4, and we'll talk about why, because 4, everyone needs to rest their brain, and everyone needs to do some of that, the silly work, and at the end of the night, sitting down, watching TV, and sort of having that aspect of your life where you're just kind of like letting go. The most harmful one of these, actually, now if you make it a habit to live your life in quadrant 4, that's a whole other deal, right? That's it's like if you're, I just passed this the New Amsterdam, or Little Amsterdam. That's the first time I'd ever seen it. The Little Amsterdam pharmacy over here that's with the green cross. If you're, marijuana was just legalized in Oregon. And so, if people that are going to spend their life in that quadrant, that's going to be a problem. But but it's not necessarily that the quadrant itself is harmful. It's how much time you spend it. What do you think? What do you think is the most important in his mind? This one should be easy.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's color coded, so it's easy. So what he talks about is that really. We just added. Someone needs to go on mute. What he talks about is that really effective managers and effective people in business and in their personal lives spend most of their time in quadrant 2, right? And I'll get into details of explaining this. So why is quadrant 1 problematic but necessary? So quadrant 1, urgent and important, right? So this is probably, we as a company spend a lot of time in quadrant 1, right? So it's urgent, meaning something has happened, right? Some fire's blown up somewhere, it's urgent, or maybe not, maybe someone's called and they've got a discharge going on or whatever, and it's super important. So it for sure needs a lot of our attention and needs attention, but what we need to be aware of is why is it that things are forcing us, that events are forcing us into this box? Is it because we didn't pay enough attention to quadrant 2? So these are kind of the most pressing tasks. This is like a crisis. This is all of a sudden a meeting or a deadline that comes out of nowhere at us. It's that firefighting, and it's that kind of sort of all of a sudden leave everything behind, focus on that, and now all of a sudden the true underlying work that we need to focus on is falling behind. So this is one where in our nature of our businesses, we're going to spend time in this, but really the goal here, what I'm trying to sort of help focus on is how do you move things into quadrant 2 to try to avoid being in this quadrant. I'm going to come back to quadrant 2 and I'll skip it because to me, one of the biggest problems I see in our company actually is this one, quadrant 3, urgent but not important. So one of the things as some of the, especially people in Alaska know, I have a habit of like telling people de-invite people off of emails or take people off of emails or de-invite them from a meeting, right? One of the things, the reason for that is, and it's, it's amazing. I mean, Stephen Covey talks about this where, he says you could be in a meeting and someone could be waiting outside, but outside your office, let's say, is waiting to meet with you, and the phone rings. You're going to somehow in your mind, you're going to pick up the phone and make the person on the outside of your office that's waiting for you wait. So there's this psychological aspect to things that we deem to be urgent, even though we have no evidence or we have evidence to even know that it's not important, right? So there's certain things that happen. So when people, we have this, feel this sense of obligation. If someone puts our name on an email and has, 10 other people that don't really have anything to do with that topic on the email, then what we've done is we've kind of forced that person into this box because now we have forced them that they got to pay attention to this. Or if we invite people to a meeting that don't necessarily need to be in that meeting, in their mind what we've done is we've taken them away from what they're doing and the importance of them having spent time in quadrant 2, and we put them in this quadrant. So really, this one is critical. This is the one that stops us from getting things to the finish line, right? Now, quadrant 1 clearly, because of things that happen, does that, but at least those are important, right? And they really are urgent. It's these things that kill us. It's the ones where, like I said, the poorly thought out meetings that soak up our times. And we feel like we have to attend it because we've already accepted it, or that person has invited us, so we feel an obligation to attend it. All of these things take really proactive thinking, right? It takes really proactive thinking to say, no, I don't need to be in that meeting, right? Or no, I don't need to be on that call. Or please take me off of this email because I really don't need to be on this email. It's the decluttering of our lives that's so critical. And I've got some quotes from Covey at the end that I'll cover. So I want everyone, again, this is not sort of, I can't cover the 7 habits on an hour-long call, but I just think the concepts are very important, and really underlying all this stuff is a requirement to think very proactively when that happens. Quadrant 4, like I said, they're necessary. It's sort of important on a personal level. It's important to spend some time in them, but the critical thing is not to spend a lot of time in it, right? So if you look at the last bullet point, we prioritize these things in the moment, and we derive some kind of pleasure from them, right? And they may not be important or urgent, but then at the end of the week, if you actually were to look back, you're amazed how many times you check, Facebook, right? And how many times you checked, you sort of did things that really had no value at the end of the day, right? So I think that's some of it is necessary, but it's a matter of managing where, when, and how much time you spend on it. But what I really want to do is spend time on quadrant 2, which is these are the things that matter. in the long run, but may not even yield results in the short term. So this is what psychologically makes it so hard, right? So when it comes to, let's say, staffing, and like I can think of, like, our, where in one area of our business that we've got, we got some issues, sort of, it seems like we've got a recurring issue, and that's where we fall behind because we're short on staffing or because of turnover, and we can never get past it. So that's the analogy of the waves. We can never get past that long enough to actually be able to put a plan in place to avoid the turnover. So that's the key, is for us to force ourselves to spend time in this quadrant, which is, it's not going to yield results next week because the reaction is, let me just get people in the door, or I can't focus on that because I'm short-handed today. But what that does, if you do that every day, you'll never get past it, right? We never get past it, which sort of, this is what happens. The other thing that you guys have heard me say often more, over and over and over again, is we just can't put Band-Aids on problems. When we deal with a problem that hits us, and sort of it's in our face, the first reaction is, let me fix the problem. It takes a lot of discipline to step back and say, okay, I've got that problem, but let me get down to the roots. What is causing this, right? What is causing the turnover? What is causing that we have a shortage in staffing in this area of our business? What is causing the fact that we are 2,000 claims or 5,000 claims behind in bills? Now, obviously, we've got an urgency, or in rejected claims, we've got an urgency to fix the situation, but it doesn't help if we just fix the situation. Someone's got to step back and say, what got us in this situation, and how do I address the underlying issue? So this is, as Covey said, it's the hardest one to be in, but it's by far the most important. Now, the way I do this, the way I kind of deal with this is, as I sort of, I do this concept of like to-do lists. I do it all the time, but I do it in the context of sort of big picture themes, right? So I try to declutter my mind at the end of the week, and I'm not saying that's just something that works for me. Actually, I did pick it up from the book, but it works for me. So I don't necessarily just kind of, and we'll talk about why that's important, because as we get deeper into this. What I do is I sort of create themes for myself, and those are my priorities, and then I put my sort of to-do list within those themes. And then I arrange the themes as to what the most important thing is. So for example, one of the themes every week might be development of our team and managers, right? So that's a theme. Or client relations might be a theme. And then I stick my to-do lists, and I prioritize my to-do list based on those themes. Because if I just wanted to make a to-do list, trust me, I literally would never get done. And I know some of you guys experience this because you wait on me to respond to emails, and you ping me 3 or 4 times, which I actually really appreciate, especially when it's important and it's getting under my radar and I'm not seeing it. I know Becca here is really good at that, and I really appreciate it, actually. But it becomes really important to prioritize, not based on all the things that are immediately in your face. It's based on what are the important things that need to get done. So that's a technique that I use that I sort of picked up here. So I think I covered most of this stuff, kind of what I call the less important, the less impactful quadrants. Quadrant 1, if we focus on quadrant 1 all the time, then we're spending our time managing crises and problems. The problems keep getting bigger and bigger, and we can never get past the waves. We're just trying to duck under the next wave, and we don't have a plan on how to get past all the waves. And then obviously it leads to stress and burnout and constantly putting out fires, and then people are just kind of running around, and the organization never moves forward. This is where you feel like, God, I'm just treading water. We're not moving forward as an organization. We're just treading water. I come in, boom, 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 we get stuff done, and then the next day I'm dealing with the exact same problems all over again. So it's really up to everyone in this room to think about what we do, not in the context necessarily of what needs to get done today, but in the context of how do I solve these issues on a go-forward basis so that it gets prevented in the future. Quadrant 3, I talked about it. This is kind of what he says. It's the one that kills organizations, right? You spend most of your time reacting to matters that seem urgent, but really actually they're not. Right? So you seem like oh my God, my calendar is full. Well, why is your calendar full? right? Is it because you accepted a bunch of meetings that don't really need to be there? And he talks about it. It's funny because when he wrote this book well before email and electronic calendars and Outlook and all this other stuff, but now it's actually become a lot easier for our calendars to get full because now we electronically invite each other and email each other all the time. He's from a period when you had to write memos to people, right? Not quick emails and texts and everything else. So now it's become even more important to not allow this to happen, and this sort of short-term focus, feeling out of control, this feeling that God, my day's done. I was super busy, but I didn't get anything done. So at the end of the day, what the hell did I get done today? I mean, trust me, there are days where I feel the same way, right? And when I start to feel that way, I actually break away and I go back and look at my list of priorities. And I look at my list and I say, okay, have I gotten away from the most important things that I need to do, right? And I keep coming back to that. If we focus on quadrant 4, well, that's obviously it's got its own problems, right? I mean, if all you're doing, and I see if all you're doing is you're checking your text all the time, checking, and then obviously you're wasting a lot of time. Ultimately, you suffer, and I mean, initially you suffer. Ultimately, the organization suffers, right? Because if you got a whole bunch of people that are wasting a bunch of time on things that aren't important, then the entire organization gets taken down. That's in fact how organizations become average. Great organizations, the way organizations don't become average and become great is they've got people who understand this, leaders that understand this, and those leaders hire people that understand this, and the entire organization is focused on 2 and then 1, right? Focus on urgent things that are important, but never taking their eyes off of quadrant 2. So kind of life in quadrant 2, okay, so what is that like? It's planning, things like planning, relationships, building relationships, whether it's client relationships, whether it's team relationships, whether it's relationships with people on your team or other teams, things like preparation, exercising. So if you exercise, if you work out, I mean, people understand this in the context of workout, right, or exercise, or golf, whatever. You're not going to see an improvement tomorrow, right? You're not doing this so that I can be healthy tomorrow, or I can lose weight tomorrow, or I can do whatever tomorrow. You're doing it because you understand that there's a long-term benefit here, and that it's got to become kind of a habit, right? And so it's the same thing in business, and that's the focus that focusing on quadrant 2 brings to the table. What it means, though, in order to do this, it means saying no to a bunch of activities. It means saying no to meetings that you don't need to be at. It means delegating things out, especially as sort of you get more senior people in the organization, delegating things out that may be important, but they're not urgent to you, right? It's not, or maybe urgent, but it's not that important, right? So it's delegating those out to people who can absorb that, because where's the highest and best use of your time? It's to spend it in quadrant 2 and really helping to drive the organization forward. So when we focus on quadrant 2, we're thinking ahead. We're looking at root causes of problems, right? We're not looking at we're not putting Band-Aid, and we're really trying to prevent the crisis from happening in the first place, right? So one example, like, we've kind of introduced this concept of health minder, right? And I remember it's like, when I first started in Vancouver, and I don't know to what extent it's still happening, and maybe it is or not, we had this problem with satellite pharmacy, and the fact that we constantly were satelliting stuff because our clients were constantly running out of stuff, right? And so when you, now, for years and years, we just kind of kept satelliting. Well, you can actually get ahead of that problem, and you can say, let me proactively contact the clients, and when I know that a certain script is really due to run out, let me get ahead of that problem and avoid that problem altogether. And I know, like, talking to Scott Sulik in Wyoming, when they did it in Wyoming, not only did it actually made everyone's life easier. It made their life easier. They were no longer getting calls in the middle of the night because some nurse at some facility realized that they were out of something, and then the on-call pharmacist was getting calls. Then the client wasn't unhappy because in their mind, their immediate thing is to blame us as a pharmacy and say that we made a mistake, even though they're the ones that made a mistake and didn't reorder the stuff. So that's kind of a way of thinking, trying to get ahead, get past the waves long enough to try to understand how I'm going to fix the underlying problem. The last point of this is what's called the Pareto principle, which, actually, to a certain extent, it's interesting because yesterday when we were doing our strategic planning on DME in Alaska, we actually spent a lot of time on this issue, which is 80%, when you look at the amount of, and you can look at this either in a positive or negative way. In Alaska, what we were focusing on was the negative way, which is if you think about 80% probably of our activities in the DME business, in the DME field, around complex billing questions, rejected claims when we don't get paid, all the stuff that goes along with it, 80% of that is getting created with 20% of the orders because we're choosing to be in certain parts of the business that's creating 80% of the work for us. So the easy answer for us is to really analyze that and cut out that 20% and free up our people so they can become a lot more effective, which is what we're doing. We're very proactively looking at exiting certain product lines, for example, so that we can actually free ourselves up so that we can do our job a lot better. What that 80%, what that 20% of the products that we sell, diabetic supplies and things of that nature, urological supplies, ostomy products, that 20% is creating massive headache for us operationally, and it's basically wrapping the entire organization around the axle, and then no one can get their job done well on the other stuff that we can actually spend our time doing. And it's really probably less than 20% of our revenues. It's probably 10% of our revenues, but it's doing that. Last weekend, Raul and I in Washington, we were doing some analysis on our claims that are sort of on being rejected. It's called stop hold in the DME business, which means we're not going to get paid for it. Well, we were looking at it. There's 2,100 claims that are in this category, right? 2,100 claims, which added up to about $106,000, which is it's about $106,000 of our money that right now the payers are saying we're not going to pay you for it. When you actually dig deep into it, of the 2,160 claims that was on that list for I can't remember, it was $107,000. Literally, 107 claims accounted for $49,000. So you had something like 7% of the claims which came from a particular business line accounted for almost 50%. So less than 8% of the claims accounted for 50% of the problems that we were facing. So that looking at things proactively and getting yourself out of the weeds long enough to actually look at it holistically allows you to actually even spot that problem. Because if all we're focused on is, oh my God, we've got 2,160 claims that I got to work through, I can't even wrap my mind around that. How do I work through 2,160 claims? But when you actually look at it and say, my God, 170 of them account for $49,000 of it, it becomes a totally different way of looking at the problem. Because what it may say is, what are we doing wrong in that line that's creating such a headache for us downstream on the other stuff? So that's kind of the way the benefit of being able to actually look at the business that way and look at our activities that way. And looking at the results, not the time, because if we just looked at the time, we would say, okay, 2,160, oh my God, that's going to take 20 minutes for a claim times 2,160, that's like, 700 hours, that's, 6 months of work or 4 months of work. We can't even wrap my mind around that. I can't do that. I can't even think about that because you got wave after wave coming in every day still. It's being able to actually break the problem down to its pieces. So, and I want to I'll finish up with some quotes because there's some great quotes that he's got. So, this is sort of in that self-control, in the area of self-control, what he talks about, what Covey talks about. It's our willing permission, our consent to what happens to us that hurts us far more than what actually happened to us in the first place. So it's this idea that people sort of sit back and they say, oh, this is happening, and instead of proactively thinking about themselves as being in charge of either trying to help avoid that problem in the future or fixing the problem, and sort of feeling more like a victim than being in charge of the events that happen to us. So there's obviously a sense of it. There's a whole empowerment aspect to the book and everything else. On time management, there's actually some great quotes here. The challenge is not to manage time, but to manage ourselves, right? So everyone's got the same amount of time in the day. I mean, I might have a couple more hours on you guys because I just sleep a couple hours less. But other than that, it's kind of like, everyone's got 24 hours a day. So when you meet people and you go, oh my God, how do they get so much done, right? How is this? I mean, I know people where I just get completely blown away. It's like, how do you get all this done? And what do you do? They're pilots and they're this and they're that. And you go like, how do you even have time for all this? Well, they're just much more effective in managing themselves. They're not managing time per se. time, it's constant. It's managing themselves that they're doing differently, right? And trust me, this one is one of my biggest challenges is actually in this one. Actually, this probably is my favorite quote. The key is not to prioritize what's on your schedule, but to schedule your priorities, right? So this is what I was talking about. It's so easy to look at your calendar, especially kind of some of the people that are, look at the calendar for the week and go, oh my God, I've got half an hour available there. It looks like on my calendar, on my Outlook calendar, it looks like there's an empty spot there for half an hour on Wednesday, right? So we tend to sort of just accept that our calendar's got all this stuff on it and then look for empty spots that we can fill. That's kind of thinking about things backwards, right? What that means is we're not thinking about what is important. What we're thinking about is what have I committed to? Now, if what you've committed to is what's everything that's important and you've prioritized properly, that's fine. But my guess is most of us don't do that, or pretty much none of us do that, I think, probably, right? Because there are often times, like I'll be on a plane, I'll look at my calendar for the next couple of weeks and I'll go, oh my God, it looks like it's full, right? And now, if I were to really dig into it, I go, half the time I look at meetings, I'm like, what the hell is that? I don't even know why it's on my calendar. So, and I remove stuff off of my calendar, right? So it takes a very proactive approach to do this. And whether it's your calendar, whether it's your daily tasks, whether it's everything you got to get done as you think ahead, it's really, really important to think about things in terms of priorities. And in order to think about priorities, you've got to put them into the priorities that you have in quadrant 2, right? It's got to be, where does this fit in my long-term view of where I want to take my part of the organization? So ultimately, this is what we're shooting for, right? If we can do this, if we can do it well, none of this stuff's easy, none of it is quick. If we can do this, then we can all kind of catch that wave, right? And you know, I grew up in Southern California near the ocean, and you know, it's amazing when you sit there and watch people that can do this well, right? They get past the waves so easily. You watch them paddle out, and then they duck under the wave, and then boom, they're on to the next one. They'll duck under that wave, they duck under that wave, and all of a sudden, they're out there. They're out there, they're sitting on their board waiting for the perfect wave to come. That's what we need to get to, right? And you see the people that are just getting there, that are sort of there with their boogie boards, and they can't even get past that first wave. They try to get out there, and they get overturned, they get pounded, and then they kind of pick themselves up. They try to do it again, and they can't do it. So my message is, we've got to think about what we do in those terms, right? And in order to do that, it takes planning, it takes thinking, it takes proactive management of our time, proactive management of our priorities. Okay? How much time do I have? 10 minutes. Okay, that's the quickest we've ever finished, because I think actually, that's the quickest I think that Xenium, I think on Xenium's side, normally I have about 10 minutes for Xenium. Okay, any questions, comments, thoughts from anyone? Has anyone, let me ask this question. Does this message resonate relative to certain parts of the business that you guys run? And if so, can someone kind of give me an example of where you feel like the daily tasks don't allow us to get in front of the long-term plan? I haven't prepared anyone.
Dan.
Yeah.
It's Dan. I will tell you personally, one of the challenges that I have, and I mean, I took this class back in the late 90s, and one of the challenges that I have is all the different groups wanting to put me on every single email trail for every single function that goes on in this building. And quite frankly, I agree that I got to excuse myself out of those. I haven't done a great job of excusing myself out of just day-to-day things that are going down, whether it be something that's being built by a robot or whatever. And it eats up a ton of my time just having to look at the emails and get through them. So I think it's a great reminder that we have to excuse ourselves from some of the things that we really don't have to be involved in. If there's something that I really need to know, then they need to bring that to me. But it doesn't have to be every single time that a robot finishes a fill that I have to read an email about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I agree with that. I mean, you know, it's funny. I remember one of the first things, like when I first started, one of the first things I did was I was pretty sort of direct about it, where I would, people would say, I would tell people, you don't need to be in this meeting. And I think culturally people were like, what are you talking about? My God, that's like how obnoxious, right? But, or I actually did it just 2 days ago with Matt Brown and Skeet and a couple other guys, who I sent him an email. I go, I don't understand why they're on this email. Why are they getting invited to this meeting? So people that know me well enough know that not to take that personally, that it's just purely all I'm trying to do is I'm trying to apply some of these principles where I see them, right? So I think, one of the key things here, messages here, is that people can't they can't take that personally if someone says, hey, if someone says, hey, I really don't think I have any of that, so I don't need to be in this meeting, and if you really believe they need to be, then you can kind of give them a reason why they need to be. But no one should take that personally, right? And say, oh, that this person's being offensive by doing that. Or if you as manager see something like that, quick story. I've got a friend of mine runs had a huge company in Australia, and what he used to do is they had this master calendar of all the meetings that were taken on in the that were going on in the company. And this was the time by then he was kind of the chairman of the company. He really wasn't involved with the day-to-day operations of the company. And what he would do is he would just pick the meetings. He would look on the board, and he would go just sit in, just sit there on the in the meeting. He would just walk in and sit there. And his goal was to get the meetings to end much more quickly, right? And so it got to the point where people felt enough pressure that they wanted to actually end the meeting, or they wanted to make sure that they weren't inviting other people. He takes it way too far. He's got a great saying. He says, losers have meetings, winners have parties, or at parties, as he says. So that's one of his. That's the thing that drives his management style. Is that when you're meeting, and with the way he explains, he's like, just think about it. The losing team after the game is the one that is having all the meetings. The winning team is having the parties. So that's the way he. Any other comments or thoughts from anyone? Okay. All right, guys. Tana, I don't know if people are interested in 7 Habits, and I have to believe that actually Open Sesame probably has I gotta believe they've got courses on 7 Habits. So that's something that if people are interested in it, certainly we will make the resources available if people want to dive more into this. But I think the key message for me is, a lot of, I can point to, I don't want to call everything out on this call necessarily, but I can point to some of the biggest problems that right now we're facing that require sort of urgent firefighting mode, where we're parachuting people in from multiple places. We're trying to focus resources to put out a fire, and that really takes a lot of my time. If I look back with better planning, better focus on the end game, where we were going, and not forgetting about our priorities, those could have been avoided. It really could have been avoided. So, the most important thing when bad things happen is we got to learn from it, and we got to make sure that we're avoiding it in the future. But I can tell you for sure that by far most of the stuff that the crisis mode, when we go into crisis mode, my feeling at least is, and maybe my expectations are too high, but my feeling is they could have been avoided. Because if we had better planning in the first place, and if we had just looked over the waves and seen what was coming at us, right? So, and I think,
Dan, your slide on the 4 quadrants, I think that's great to print out and put it in front of you, because what you will visualize, where am I spending my time, and it'll give you kind of that reality check. And so that 1-pager slide, I think, is great to put up. Yeah. And I also think your point, we're so busy moving in so many different directions. As leaders, we have to have time to reflect and assess and reevaluate, because then it's the gerbil wheel. We're constantly chasing our tail. So I think we have to have time to sit back and reflect and saying, am I doing activities that are the highest return for the company, and am I leveraging talents and skills through my direct reports?
I totally agree. I literally, oftentimes, like on a Sunday or something, I literally will draw the quadrant for myself and say, okay, what did I do and what am I doing? And I focus in on that quadrant 2, and really for me, that quadrant 2 is driven by the strategic plan for the company, which is what are the long-term things around building our team, building sales relationships with clients, efficiencies that we need to create, best practices we need to create. Am I spending my time in those areas, right? Or am I spending my time trying to figure out how we get out from some hole that we find ourselves in? Because that, I mean, I promise you that's not the best use of my time. I mean, so if I'm getting sucked into it, then I know as it goes down the organization it's happening. Okay? All right, guys, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it as usual. I will put the recording up on Yammer. So to any of you guys feel like other people can benefit from it, please point people to the Yammer. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Next party.
I don't know.
That one.